Hey guys, we've already learned about the scientific method, including things like the question, the hypothesis, experiment, that sort of thing. What I want to get into now is what does it take to do a lab write-up and what are the kind of elements you need in there, okay? And so let's go ahead and get right to it. And lab write-up. So I want to remind you, anything that appears in white, you have to write it down. No, you don't have to write down all this stuff and this gibberish and the graphic. This lesson doesn't have a lot of other kinds of stuff in it, but anything in white, you got to write. Okie doke, here we go. First of all, lab write-ups always start with a question. Write that down. If I go too fast, pause it and then write it down and then pick it back up where you go. Now, the thing about the question, it should always include the manipulated variable and the responding variable. Remember, manipulated variable is what you're testing, and the response is that's the data you take. You want to see if the responding variable responds to the manipulation of the other variable. So always have your question worded that has both the manipulated and responding variable involved, okay? So for example, you might say, does the price of paper towel affect how much water it can absorb? Your lab might be, I think the more expensive paper towels will absorb more water. Well, how do you test that hypothesis? Well, you come up with an experiment where you see, and the manipulated variables, the price of the paper towel, and how much water it absorbs is the data. So that's your question. Does the price of the paper towel affect how much water it absorbs? Now, another question might be, does the height of you drop a ball from affects how high it bounces? It might be, okay, if I drop it from higher, the more it's going to bounce. Okay, that would be the question, but you always phrase it, does the height you drop it from, manipulated variable, affect how high it bounces? Responding variable. Okay, so those are the key things for, remember, if it's yellow, just let it mellow. You don't have to write the yellow part down. Those are just examples. Okay, but hypothesis is the second part. I'm going to tell you that not every lab write-up you ever do in a science class is going to have a required hypothesis on this, but it is part of the classic scientific method, so it's good to teach it. It should state your most likely answer to the question. Okay, so it's like whatever you think the answer probably is, sometimes called an educated guess, that's your hypothesis. So you might state it, my hypothesis is that the more expensive brand of paper towel will absorb more water. So if that's your hypothesis, sweet, go ahead and write it out. And that's what you're going to test to find out and see if the data backs it up. Or sometimes they say you wanted an if-then statement. An if-then statement would be like, if you drop a ball from a greater height, it will bounce higher. It's what would you predict happens in that lab if your hypothesis is true. So this kind of links it into a prediction. Again, how you phrase it, you're going to see different teachers requiring different things. Sometimes you won't have to have an actual hypothesis specifically specified at all. But there it is. Okay, now, now the procedure, this is the part sometimes if you're doing your own lab, this is the part that's the most work. You know, you got to write down your procedure. What you want to have in a procedure is it's got to be numbered step-by-step list of instructions, okay? So you don't want to have a procedure that's so vague people can't follow it. So you want it to be numbered step-by-step, and so it should be clear enough that anyone could read them and do the exact same experiment. That's another guideline. That's the part you got to think. When you're writing stuff down, you know what you got in mind. You can't assume that the person who's reading it knows what you've got in mind. You got to say it. You got to say it clearly. You got to say it in a way people can follow. Okay, with this one here, I have this thing I like to do at the beginning of the year where you write directions to make a peanut butter sandwich. If you were in my class last year, you got to see it. I don't see how I can make that work online. So instead, here's a video that kind of shows a little bit of the idea of the importance of a clear procedure using that peanut butter sandwich as an example.